Imagine dedicating 30 years to your son only to hear him call you the help at a dinner party. This is the moment Ramona's world shattered and the incredible journey where she found herself again. If you've ever been overlooked by those you love most, this story is for you. Welcome to her Fireside Stories, wishing you a wonderful listening experience. I still remember the exact moment I stopped breathing. Not literally, of course, but that freezing heartbeat when your lungs constrict and you realize your entire life is built on a lie. It happened on a frosty evening in late autumn in a house I believed was mine, surrounded by people I thought cared about me. Clarissa was the ringleader, tall, willowy with a swish of pale pink hair. She insisted was fashionable for women in the know. She had an entire persona curated for her social media presence. Her nails were always manicured in soft pastel shades. Her outfits color coordinated to exude the perfect blend of modern professionalism and avant-garde style. She had a voice like a newly sharpened knife, smooth on the surface, razor thin just beneath, and that night her words cut deeper than she would ever know. They were gathered around my dining table, angled just so that the city lights framing the bay behind them could be captured in her live stream. Adrian, my son, or so, I believed for 3 decades, sat next to her, hair cropped close to his head in a style Clarissa approved of. She had once told him it made him look more sophisticated, like a future CEO. He simply went along with whatever she said. There I was, arms aching from carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres that I'd spent the afternoon making, when Clarissa's mother gestured vaguely in my direction and asked, "Who's that?" Clarissa responded with a light tinkling laugh that was designed to charm her social media audience. "Oh, that's Ramona," she said, waving me off. "She's basically our live-in help. Keeps the house running, cleans up for us, pays all the bills, that kind of thing." I felt my face go cold. No one corrected her. Adrian, with his newly shortened hair and crisp button-up shirt, joined in the laughter, though his eyes flickered with something like guilt. But he didn't speak up. He didn't say, "Mom, I'm sorry," or "That's my mother," or even, "She's more than a maid." He just let it unfold. In that silent, damning moment, I realized that everything I had ever done for him for them was being shoved aside like clutter from a busy desk. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept twisting and untwisting the ends of my thick, dark curls hair that I'd once been proud of but had recently started binding into a practical bun, because nobody in that house ever noticed my appearance anyway. The more I thought about the insult, the more I felt the walls of my bedroom blur around me. Yes, the mortgage and every utility bill were in my name, but that didn't seem to matter. I recalled every sacrifice, every shift I had worked, every single time I told Adrian. Yes, when my bank account screamed. No, I remembered cold winter mornings at the grocery store, coupons in hand, trying to stretch my paycheck so Adrian could have the nice soccer cleats or the brand name backpack all his friends had. I realized in that sleepless hush that I'd never once asked anything from him in return. When the morning sunlight finally crept in through the blinds, I found myself calm, perhaps too calm. I prepared the coffee, fed our black cat named Onyx, but Clarissa always referred to her as the cat and claimed allergies whenever it was convenient, and waited. Clarissa clacked into the kitchen in her designer leggings and a cropped sweatshirt that sported her own brand logo, a swirl of pastel colors. Her phone was pressed to her ear, lips pursed in mild annoyance. When she ended her call, she looked up at me and asked Ramona, "Have you finished drafting my business proposal for the wellness workshop?" I stared at her, a dull ache in my chest. "No, I haven't," I replied. "Actually, I have something for you." I removed the key ring from my pocket. House key, mailbox key, the key to the garage. With a steady hand, I placed them on the kitchen counter. "Good luck with the mortgage," I said, voice startlingly even. Her sculpted eyebrows knitted in confusion. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. She angled her pink hair so it fell perfectly over one eye, as if even this moment might become social media content. But I didn't answer. I just walked out the door, left my own house without more than my car keys and my purse, and took what felt like my first real breath in years. I drove straight across town to a rundown apartment building I'd inherited a decade ago from my late Aunt Vera. She had been a nurse at Redwood Memorial Hospital for her entire career, and many years ago, she'd told me she'd leave me this place in her will. At the time, I'd had grand plans for renovations, but then life happened. Adrian's college tuition, Clarissa's business expansions, a million daily crises I'd funded from my own pocket. The apartment sat mostly empty and neglected too far on the edges of the city to be of interest to wealthy renters. Now standing at the threshold of its peeling front door, I felt an overwhelming surge of relief. The air smelled like old paint and the faint odor of mothballs. But at least it was my space. I'd never updated the decor. So it still bore scuffed parquet floors and faded floral wallpaper from decades earlier. The living room contained a battered love seat I'd stored here for years, the fabric fraying at the edges. The bedroom had an ancient bed frame that Aunt Vera left behind, but the mattress was long gone. None of it mattered. All I cared about was that for once I wasn't subject to Clarissa's schedule or Adrian's dismissive attitude. I slipped out of my shoes, feeling the worn parquet beneath my feet. The silence was both soothing and terrifying. I realized I had no plan, no blueprint for how to rebuild the life I had accidentally burned by leaving. But that sense of not knowing, of stepping into the unknown, also felt like freedom. The phone in my coat pocket began to buzz, and I glimpsed Adrian's name on the screen. I almost answered, wanting to tell him exactly how his inaction, his quiet complicity, had shredded the last of my illusions. But I let it ring until it fell silent. Instead, I walked to the dusty kitchen table, sat down, and stared out the window at the city lights. I had no regrets about handing over the keys, and this was the first step, I told myself, in truly reclaiming who I was. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotional whiplash. I'd wake up on that lumpy old love seat, blinking at the yellowed wallpaper, and each morning I'd momentarily forget why I was there. I'd rub my eyes, fully expecting to be in my familiar bed, stepping into a morning routine of making coffee and tidying up after Clarissa and Adrian. Then reality would settle like a weight in my chest. I had left them behind, on my own terms no less. I wrestled with guilt, though. Even if Adrian had let Clarissa belittle me, I couldn't forget the baby I once cuddled through countless fevers and nightmares. I recalled the boy with a mop of unruly curls who clung to my hand on his first day of kindergarten, except that boy's hair was always changing with the trends. At one point, it was dyed green. At another, it was parted to the side. When Clarissa arrived in his life, she insisted he adopt the short, business-like style he now wore. Sometimes in those lonely hours, I asked myself, had I encouraged him to become so dependent on others' approval? Did I, by always bending over backward, teach him that I was invisible? I found myself jotting these musings in a spiral-bound notebook, a relic from Adrian's high school days. It was stuffed at the bottom of a box I'd once intended to donate, but journaling felt like a balm. Each page became a confession, detailing years of missed thank yous and trivial humiliations. Through scribbled tears, I wrote about the time Clarissa and Adrian went on a tropical vacation without telling me, leaving me behind in the house to feed Onyx, pay the bills, and restock their fridge. Before they returned, I remembered how Clarissa joked online about house staff and how Adrian would just smile in the background, never clarifying that the staff was me. By the fifth day, I realized I wasn't done uncovering truths. There was a trunk in Aunt Vera's storage closet that I had never opened. I'd always been too busy with chores, with errands, with making life easy for my ungrateful household. Now curiosity tugged at me. What if there was something inside that trunk? something that might explain why Aunt Vera was so insistent that I keep this apartment. The trunk was exactly where I remembered it, beneath a stack of ancient hospital training manuals Aunt Vera had kept. It was metal and rusted at the corners, the latch stiff. After wrestling with it for several minutes, I managed to pry it open, coughing at the swirl of dust that erupted from inside. At first glance, I saw only old photographs, faded Polaroids of nurses' gatherings, and what looked like staff Christmas parties. But as I shifted these aside, I found a smaller, battered cardboard box taped shut. Inside that box were papers, and on top of the stack was an envelope marked with my name, Ramona. The handwriting was undoubtedly Aunt Vera's, slanted and meticulous. My heart hammered, a sense of foreboding tingled in my spine. It felt like Aunt Vera had left me a secret, something she never dared share while she was alive. With shaky fingers, I opened the envelope and began to read. It was a letter dated decades ago, just around the time Adrian was born. Aunt Vera wrote that she had been working the night shift at Redwood Memorial Hospital on the very day of my son's birth. In the letter, she confessed that something happened in the maternity ward, some sort of confusion with the newborn identification tags. By the time the error was noticed, the babies had already gone home. Aunt Vera had tried to raise the alarm, but higher-ups at the hospital insisted there was no mix-up. Then years later, she discovered hush money payments in the hospital's records. A child named Carter Glenwood was listed as the potential baby who had been switched with mine. I had to read it multiple times before I grasped the meaning. If Carter Glenwood was my real son, then who was Adrian? My breath caught and tears blurred the words on the page. I told myself this couldn't be possible, some medical fiasco from a soap opera, not from my own life. But the further I read, the more I saw that Aunt Vera had documented everything. Copies of test results, affidavits, even notes from the hospital's legal counsel. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the envelope. In that moment, I felt utterly unmoored. It was like realizing your reflection in the mirror belongs to someone else. A swirl of emotions hit me: betrayal, confusion, heartbreak, and strangely, a whisper of relief. The distance I'd felt from Adrian for the past few years. The coldness he showed me, the way he hardly treated me like a mother. Could it be that on some level, he'd always known something was off between us? Curling my legs under me on the dusty floor, I spread out the documents. Aunt Vera had even included a small black and white photograph of a newborn with a label reading Baby Glenwood. I clutched that photo, tears threatening to spill. If Carter Glenwood was my biological son, he must be around the same age as Adrian, early 30s. There was a note in Aunt Vera's letter mentioning that she believed Carter and his adoptive family still lived nearby. She suspected they had received a settlement to keep quiet, but she couldn't prove how deeply it went. All she knew was that Carter's life had been irrevocably swapped with Adrian's. I didn't hate Adrian despite everything I'd raised him. But love can become complicated when the person you've dedicated your life to treats you like a burden. This discovery was unraveling the last threads of what I thought was certain. If Adrian wasn't my biological child, why had I never realized? But how could I have known babies are babies and the paternal side of the family had never questioned Adrian's resemblance or asked for DNA tests? My ex-husband, Adrian's presumed father, hadn't stuck around long enough to care. For a long time, I sat amid these papers, letting the truth soak in. Then an unsettling thought emerged. If Carter was my real son, had he been living a better life without me, or a worse one? Did he feel loved and wanted, or was he also overlooked somehow? My heart cracked thinking of a child. My child growing up without me. All the energy and resources I'd poured into Adrian. Could it have been meant for Carter? The next morning, I could barely function. Sleep had eluded me. Haunted by images of two newborns, their futures switched with a simple clerical mishap, I considered calling Adrian, telling him everything, demanding answers. But what answers could he possibly give? He hadn't known, or maybe he had suspected something. Maybe that was why he was so ready to dismiss me. No, that was a rabbit hole. I couldn't tumble down yet. I forced myself to shower, slip into jeans and an old sweater, and head to the local coffee shop. I needed caffeine and I needed distance from that trunk full of secrets. The barista recognized me from my errands in the old neighborhood, a sweet girl with short green hair and a silver nose ring. She smiled sympathetically as if sensing my turmoil. I perched on a stool by the window, cupping a latte to warm my cold fingers, and thought about what to do next. In the stack of documents, Aunt Vera had included the address of a small bookstore that Carter supposedly owned. It wasn't definitive, but she had scribbled a note. Carter G. may run Glenwood Books on Hyde Street if he was indeed the child who was switched with Adrian. That meant he was right here in the same city living his life parallel to mine. Could I just walk into that bookstore and say, "Hey, I might be your mother"? The thought was absurdly terrifying. Yet, as I sat there sipping my latte, I realized I had nothing left to lose. Clarissa and Adrian were out of my life for now. I had no job tying me down. My job had always been them, and I had a broken heart that needed closure. So after finishing my drink, I gathered my courage and drove across town. I couldn't do anything about the hospital. Decades had passed, but I could at least see Carter with my own eyes. Maybe I wouldn't speak to him yet. Perhaps just watching him from a distance would be enough to confirm that my life's puzzle had always been missing a piece. I would love to know what you think so far. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Glenwood Books was tucked on a quiet tree-lined street surrounded by antique shops and a cafe that smelled of freshly baked croissants. The sign was modest dark green wood with gold lettering spelling out Glenwood Books. Through the large glass window, I saw rows of shelves brimming with paperbacks and hardcovers, and behind the counter stood a man about Adrian's age. He was tall with shoulder-length chestnut brown hair tied back in a neat ponytail. It wasn't a style Adrian would ever consider. He always followed Clarissa's instructions for that polished corporate cut. This man, presumably. Carter looked comfortable wearing a simple cardigan over a collared shirt and jeans. His eyes were warm even from a distance, and he smiled easily at the customers browsing the aisles. Something inside me lurched. I had no proof at that moment except Aunt Vera's folder, but I felt an inexplicable connection. I stood outside, heart pounding, torn between rushing in or running away. Then Carter noticed me, offered a curious smile, and nodded in greeting. Panicked, I returned a small wave and hurried around the corner. My heart hammered so violently that I had to lean against the brick wall of the adjacent bakery. What was I doing? Had I really expected to just waltz in and drop the biggest bombshell of his life? Eventually, I gathered the courage to circle back and slip inside the bookstore. My eyes darted around, pretending to scan titles. Carter was helping an elderly gentleman find a history book, so I was free to wander. The interior smelled of old pages and faint incense, a soothing aroma that calmed my frayed nerves. When Carter finally finished with the other customer, he approached me with a friendly smile. "Looking for something specific?" he asked, voice gentle. My throat nearly closed up. For a split second, I saw a toddler with my eyes a boy. I might have brought to the park or read bedtime stories to, but I swallowed and forced a polite grin. "Oh, I'm just browsing," I managed. He nodded, recommended a new mystery novel, and went back to rearranging a stack of books. I hovered a moment longer, uncertain if I was about to laugh or cry, and then I quietly left the weight of a million unspoken words pressing down on my chest. I repeated this pattern for several days, driving across town, loitering near Glenwood Books, sometimes venturing inside to buy a small item, a pen, a notebook, or a paperback. Carter greeted me politely each time, never prying. I studied how he interacted with customers, noticing he had a naturally patient demeanor, attentive but not overbearing. Occasionally, he'd push back a stray lock of hair that escaped his ponytail, or he'd pause to sip a chamomile tea from a ceramic mug. His presence exuded the kind of calm that felt entirely alien in my old home, where everything was staged for Clarissa's brand. Meanwhile, my phone vibrated constantly with missed calls from Adrian. I left them unanswered. The voicemails he left grew increasingly desperate, first demanding an explanation, then apologizing in halting words, finally accusing me of abandoning him. I listened to one or two, but soon deleted them. The mention of Clarissa in his messages made my stomach turn. In the evenings back at Aunt Vera's apartment, I pored over every page of her documents. The swirl of official seals and typed lines painted a painfully clear picture. Redwood Memorial Hospital made a grave error, one they covered up with hush money. Carter Glenwood's birth certificate was correct, but the hospital staff had swapped the baby's ID tags. Adrian ended up being raised by me, and Carter was whisked home by another family, presumably receiving the financial settlement that kept them quiet. Aunt Vera only learned the absolute truth years after. By then, the hospital's statute of limitations and non-disclosure agreements prevented her from saying a word publicly, but she kept everything hoping one day I'd find it, or maybe that I'd never need to. On the fourth day of my quiet observations, I sat in my car outside the bookstore until closing time. Carter emerged around sunset, locking up the shop. A gust of wind blew his ponytail loose, sending strands of hair flying around his face. He looked content, eyes reflecting a sense of peace. Tears gathered in my eyes because that tranquility was it stolen from me or from him, or maybe from both of us. Eventually, I summoned the nerve to tell someone else about the switch. Not Adrian, not Carter, but an attorney. I needed legal clarity. If Redwood Memorial had orchestrated a cover-up, what implications did that have for my rights, my identity, my entire life as a mother? I booked a consultation at a small law office downtown. The place was understated with a single potted fern in the lobby and a secretary who greeted me with a warm smile. My lawyer's name was Celine. She wore her blonde hair in a short modern pixie cut, and her direct gaze told me she wasn't the type to mince words. I handed over Aunt Vera's documents explaining the entire saga, how I discovered the trunk, the hush money, and the possibility that Adrian wasn't my biological son. Celine listened intently, occasionally jotting notes. After flipping through the pages, she sighed and leaned back. "This is complicated," she said, tapping the folder. "The hospital is likely protected by multiple layers of legal agreements and statutes of limitations. Pursuing them could be extremely costly and emotionally draining." I nodded grimly. "What about the mortgage issue?" I asked, shifting the conversation to Clarissa and Adrian. "I own the house I walked away and I'm currently listing it for sale. They can't pay it. I want to reclaim my name, my assets, my identity." Celine's expression hardened with resolve. "That's straightforward in comparison," she said. "It's legally your property. You have every right to evict them and sell." I felt a wave of relief. "We'll proceed," I said. "I want nothing from them except to finalize my independence." It felt cold to say, but after years of being used, a little iciness was warranted. After signing a few documents to set this in motion, I left the law office stepping onto the bustling sidewalk. People hurried by arms full of shopping bags, phones pressed to their ears. I felt oddly invisible, just another face in the crowd. But for the first time in my life, that invisibility felt freeing. No one here demanded my labor or sneered at my worth. A few days later, I took another brave step. I walked into Glenwood Books as it opened, determined not just to buy something, but to actually talk to Carter. My heart did a jittery dance in my chest as I approached the counter. He greeted me with the same friendly warmth he'd offered countless times. "Morning," he said, voice calm as ever. you're in early today. My nerves flared, but I forced a small smile. I was hoping for a recommendation. I began, my voice barely above a whisper. Something comforting, maybe. Something about finding yourself after a big change. His expression softened. I've got just the thing, he said, guiding me to a shelf near the back. We passed through narrow aisles filled with hardcover novels, and I noticed how meticulously he organized them. We stopped in front of a collection of memoirs. He pulled out a book featuring swirling calligraphy on the cover, a story about someone who traveled across the world to rediscover their heritage. As Carter handed it to me, our eyes met, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of recognition. Or was it my imagination projecting my desire for him to sense we were connected? Thanks, I managed. Then, taking a deep breath, I added, I actually wanted to tell you something. The words lodged in my throat. Carter cocked his head, eyebrows quirked in gentle curiosity. Yes, I froze. My mind flashed to the moment Clarissa and Adrian had dismissed me in front of her parents, the hush of shame I'd carried for so long. Then I pictured Aunt Vera's trunk, the black and white photo labeled Baby Glenwood. My mouth went dry. With a small shake of my head, I muttered, "Thank you for the recommendation," and scurried to the register. He rang me up without further questions, though. Concern lingered in his gaze. As I stepped out of the bookstore, clutching the memoir to my chest, I silently berated myself for not telling him. But I realized some truths need careful timing, or they risk destroying more than they heal. When I returned to Aunt Vera's apartment that afternoon, I discovered a plain envelope tucked beneath the door. My name was scrawled in Adrian's familiar handwriting. A jolt of anxiety shot through me. Was he here? How did he find out where I lived? Carefully, I lifted the envelope and slipped inside. Locking the door, I sank onto the love seat before opening it. Inside was a letter all in Adrian's slanted script. Mom, if I can still call you that, I've been trying to reach you. Clarissa's parents cut us off. Her business deals are collapsing. We can't make the mortgage or even rent a decent place right now. We're in real trouble. I know you're angry. Maybe you hate me, but I'm asking for help. If it's about the cost, let's negotiate. We'll take over the mortgage, figure out a payment plan. Please don't sell. I'm not doing well, and Clarissa is losing it, Adrian. I folded the paper, each sentence fueling my resolve. He didn't mention love or regret for humiliating me. He didn't acknowledge the years I'd spent at his beck and call. It was all about Clarissa's meltdown, their financial ruin, how they needed me to bail them out. That's when I finally recognized the toxic pattern I had spent a lifetime stepping in to fix Adrian's problems. This time, I wouldn't. In the fading evening light, I penned a reply, though I didn't know if I'd send it. I wrote that I was done, that he and Clarissa would have to stand on their own, that my lawyer would handle all future communications. As I wrote, a sense of liberation flooded me, equal parts sadness and triumph. Though I felt pangs of maternal guilt, I reminded myself that sometimes the only way to break a cycle is to refuse to participate in it anymore. I set the unsent letter aside, deciding to think on it. Maybe I'd mail it, or maybe I'd simply keep it as evidence that this time I'd chosen myself. For once in my life, I wouldn't allow their chaos to devour my dreams. That weekend, I indulged in the rare luxury of self-care. I drew myself a hot bath in the old, slightly chipped tub, lit a scented candle that smelled of eucalyptus, and let the steam envelop me. Memories flitted through my head like postcards from a former life cooking. Adrian's favorite meals while he scrolled on his phone, staying up late to reorder Clarissa's office supplies because she'd forget last minute and blame me if they didn't arrive on time. With each memory, I submerged deeper into the water, letting it wash away layers of resentment. Afterward, I wrapped myself in a fluffy robe and tried to do something I hadn't done in ages style. My hair just for me. My curls, once shiny and thick, had lost their luster after years of stress. But I took my time applying a nourishing mask, combing through the tangles. When I looked in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back, soft lines around her eyes, new streaks of silver at the temples. But I saw someone who was worth being cared for, even if I was the only one doing the caring. The following day, I dressed in a simple blouse and jeans and drove to a quiet part of town to clear my mind. With a walk, I found myself wandering into a park with tall oak trees, scattered benches, and a pond shimmering under the autumn sun. While there, I thought about Carter, about the unimaginable conversation I still needed to have with him. At the same time, I considered that the house was now on the market. My attorney had listed it quickly, and prospective buyers would be viewing the place soon, meaning Clarissa and Adrian had limited time to vacate. Although guilt lurked, a louder voice in my head reminded me that this was the right path. I was reclaiming a life that had been overshadowed by their demands. As for Carter, I hadn't decided exactly how I'd tell him the truth, but the more I embraced my newfound autonomy, the more I realized I couldn't let that truth remain buried. On a crisp Monday morning, I found myself back in front of Glenwood Books. I'd spent much of the night rehearsing what I might say to Carter. I have something to tell you, something that will change everything. But even that simple sentence felt monumental. My palms were sweaty as I stepped inside. The familiar scent of paper and wood polish immediately soothed my nerves, as it always did. Carter was behind the counter discussing a potential event with a local poet. I lingered near a display of newly arrived fiction, flipping through pages without actually reading. Once the poet left, Carter caught my eye and smiled. "Hey there," he said, gesturing me over. "I'm testing some new herbal teas. Feel like sampling?" I couldn't help but smile back. "Sure." He motioned to a small table near the corner. Steam rose from two porcelain teacups, the floral aroma filling the air. We sat across from each other, and I watched him take a careful sip. "It's lavender chamomile," he explained, then asked, "How have you been?" "Good," I lied reflexively, clearing my throat. "Actually," my voice trailed. I felt the heavy weight of Aunt Vera's documents in my handbag. Should I whip them out now or ease into it? Fear gnawed at me. I didn't want him to think I was unhinged, but I also remembered how horrifying it felt to learn I might have spent my life raising the wrong child. Didn't he deserve to know too? Suddenly, a torrent of emotion rose in me. If I didn't speak now, I might never gather the courage again. "Listen, Carter," I said, hands gripping the teacup. "I know this might sound odd, but I came here for a reason." Concern flickered in his eyes. He nodded for me to continue. My heart pounded in my ears, but I swallowed hard and said, "There's a possibility that I'm your biological mother and that you were switched at birth with the son I raised." His expression froze. The teacup trembled in his hand. For a moment, I feared he might throw me out of the store. Instead, he just stared as if the world had suddenly tilted. "I would love to know what you think so far. Please share your thoughts in the comments below." The next few minutes passed in a haze. Carter set his cup down before he spilled the tea, then leaned forward, eyes wide. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" he whispered. My mouth felt parched. "I know it sounds impossible," I said, carefully retrieving Aunt Vera's folder from my handbag. "I have documents, hospital records, statements from a nurse, my aunt. She discovered a birth mix-up years ago at Redwood Memorial. She believed our babies were swapped." Carter hesitated, glancing at the folder as if it might explode in his face. His breathing was shallow, and I felt a stab of guilt for blindsiding him. You're telling me my parents?" He paused, swallowing. "They're not my biological parents," I nodded grimly. "They might not know, or maybe they suspected something. There was hush money from the hospital. Apparently, I'm not accusing them of anything. But if these records are accurate, you were meant to come home with me, and the boy I raised was meant to go with them. I'm so sorry to spring this on you, but I felt you had a right to know." His eyes flickered over the name on the envelope, Redwood Memorial Hospital. He shook his head in disbelief. "I don't know what to say." My parents retired in Florida recently. We speak often, but this never came up. They never hinted at anything like this. A surge of guilt welled in me. What if Carter had been perfectly happy in his life, never questioning a thing, and I had just shattered that peace? Quietly, I slid the documents closer. Take them, I said. Read them in your own time. We can do a DNA test if you want. I'm not looking to uproot your life. I just needed you to know the truth. My voice wavered, tears threatening. Carter looked from me to the folder, then back again. Wow. He managed, raking a hand through his hair. I'm not angry at you, but I'm shaken. I nodded, tears brimming in my eyes. Please, if you want me to leave, I will. But I'll be here if you want to talk. I left Glenwood Books soon after giving Carter the space he needed. Once outside, my emotions erupted in a silent storm. Leaning against my car, I breathed in short gasps, fighting a wave of dizziness. I'd held on to that secret for such a brief time, but it felt like an eternity. Now I'd shared it with the person most affected beyond myself, and I had no idea how his life would change from here. Back at the apartment, the hours crawled. I tried to read the memoir he'd recommended, but my mind couldn't settle. Around midnight, my phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. My heart leaped. Could it be Carter? I opened it hesitantly. This is Carter. I've spent hours reading the documents. I'm not sure what to do or how to feel. I don't want to be angry at my parents, but if they knew, I'm just confused. Let's talk soon. Relief washed over me. He didn't hate me. He didn't call me a liar. At least now the lines of communication were open. I typed back. I understand. Take your time. I'm here whenever you're ready. For the next 2 days, I tried to focus on normal tasks: grocery shopping, cleaning the apartment, going for walks. Meanwhile, Celine, my lawyer, called to confirm the house's sale was moving faster than anticipated. Prospective buyers were bidding, and Clarissa and Adrian were furious, apparently bombarding her with phone calls. I felt a stab of guilt, but reminded myself I'd given them so much already. Finally, one afternoon, my phone rang. Carter. I'd like to meet, he said. His voice was shaky, but determined. Somewhere quiet so we can talk without distractions. We agreed on a small cafe near the university where the windows looked out over a quiet side street. I arrived first, sipping a glass of water with trembling hands. When he walked in, he looked exhausted, hair disheveled, eyes rimmed with red. But he offered me a tentative smile. I'm still in shock, he admitted, sliding into the seat across from me. But I need to know more. I nodded, bracing myself. This conversation would change both of our lives. For the next hour, we talked in hushed voices, picking at slices of lemon cake we barely tasted. Carter asked me everything: how I found out when Aunt Vera discovered the mix-up, why I waited so long to contact him. I answered as best as I could, explaining I'd only recently learned the truth myself, sifting through Aunt Vera's trunk after I'd left Adrian's home. I confessed that part of me felt selfish for wanting to tell him it was a decision that could overturn his entire sense of self. Carter shook his head. You're not selfish, he said. You didn't ask for this any more than I did. If anything, you could have chosen to never say anything. He exhaled, glancing out the window where students hurried along the sidewalk. But now I'm wondering, what if my parents knew? What if that's why they helped me open the bookstore so easily? They never said no to anything I wanted, even when money was tight. Bitterness flickered in his voice, then faded into sadness. I feel like my entire life was on rails. I didn't choose. I reached across the table, resting my hand atop his. I understand that feeling. I spent so many years pouring love into someone who barely acknowledged me. Now I realize maybe I felt disconnected because at a subconscious level something wasn't right. Carter nodded slowly, tears shining in his eyes. In that moment, I glimpsed a reflection of my own inner turmoil. We parted ways with a plan to meet again. Neither of us used the word mom or son. The titles felt too big. too sudden, but we did exchange a hug, a moment of wordless comfort. Holding him, I recognized the gentle warmth of a person I might have taught to ride a bike, comforted through scraped knees, or tucked in at night with a lullaby. Instead, we were strangers forging a connection under the weight of decades lost. After we pulled apart, Carter gave me a reassuring nod and walked away, leaving me to wonder how this fragile bridge between our two lives might hold up under the weight of reality. 2 days after my talk with Carter, I got a frantic voicemail from Clarissa of all people. She sounded distraught, her usually clipped tone replaced by desperation. "Ramona," she said, voice cracking, "please, we need to talk about the house. The realtor said we have 30 days. This is insane. We have nowhere to go." I listened without sympathy, recalling her exact words during that humiliating dinner. "She's basically our live-in help." Did she think I'd forgotten I forwarded the voicemail to Celine? She advised me not to respond directly and assured me everything was proceeding legally. Clarissa had no claim to my property. Plain and simple. That afternoon, I made a rare trip by the old house just to see if they were moving out yet. I parked discreetly down the street and watched from behind tinted windows. Through the big bay window, I could see boxes stacked in the living room. Adrian was pacing, phone to his ear hair disheveled. Clarissa flitted around, likely barking orders at him. The once pristine lawn was littered with packing materials. I remembered how meticulously I used to mow it, pruning the rose bushes so Clarissa could show them off for her social media updates. Part of me felt a pang of sadness, but another part felt a vindictive thrill. They're finally learning what it means to stand on their own. I didn't even get out of the car, just watched for a moment, then drove away. I refused to let pity overshadow the necessity of reclaiming my freedom. That evening, as if sensing my turmoil, Carter texted. He mentioned he'd been grappling with whether to talk to his parents about the revelations. "I want answers," he wrote, "but I'm also scared they'll say they knew all along." I told him I understood, encouraging him to ask for the truth if he felt ready. The next morning, he replied that he'd called them, and they seemed flustered. They insisted he must be mistaken. They denied any hush money but didn't volunteer to do a DNA test. "I'm going to push harder," he wrote, "but I might need your support." I read his message twice, marveling at how quickly we'd become allies in a shared mystery of stolen motherhood and borrowed childhood. A week passed and my world took on a strange rhythm. Text updates from Carter, legal updates from Celine, and a roaring silence from Adrian, who had finally stopped calling. On a brisk Saturday afternoon, Carter and I agreed to meet at a local park we'd both come to enjoy. It had winding paths through tall trees, and at this time of year, the leaves were a riot of gold and crimson. He arrived wearing a charcoal gray sweater and jeans, his hair half pulled back with a simple band. He looked anxious yet resolved. I confronted my parents. He said as we strolled, "I flew down to Florida to see them in person. I wanted to look them in the eye." I watched him carefully, noticing how his jaw tightened. "They tried to deny it at first," he continued, "but eventually my dad, well, the man who raised me, confessed they had suspicions when I was born. There was confusion at the hospital. Then one day, a settlement offer arrived. The hospital reps claimed the staff had made an error with the ID tags, but insisted there was no guarantee we were in the wrong families. My parents had little money. They took the payout thinking it was best not to rock the boat." My heart clenched. "So they went along with it," I said softly. Carter nodded, fighting tears. "They said they felt guilty, but they loved me and were afraid of losing me. They never imagined this would all come to light." We paused by a pond where geese honked, drifting along the water's surface. "I'm sorry," I offered, touching his shoulder. "I can't imagine what you're feeling." He let out a shaky sigh. Angry, sad, confused. But a part of me also feels relief. Like I understand why there were moments in my childhood where I felt like the odd one out at family gatherings. You know, little mannerisms or tastes that never aligned with theirs. We stood there in silence, listening to the geese absorbing this new reality. Where do we go from here? He asked. I don't want to lose them, but I also want to know you. Not long after that conversation, I got another unexpected visitor. This time it was Adrian. He showed up outside Aunt Vera's apartment on a cold evening when the wind whipped leaves down the street. I recognized the faint outline of his jacket through the peephole. For a moment I froze, tempted not to answer. But something in me relented. I opened the door. He looked disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, that once short hair grown out a bit in messy waves. No longer the polished image Clarissa demanded, Mom, he said, voice raw. I didn't correct him. He swallowed hard. I know about the house. I know it's practically sold. I nodded, arms crossed. He trembled, whether from the cold or emotion I couldn't tell. Can I come in? He asked softly. I stepped aside, letting him into the dimly lit living room. He glanced around at the sparse furniture, the dusty corners, the air thick with old linen smell. I tried to call, he muttered. I know, I replied. He sank onto the love-seat head in his hands. Clarissa and we're separated. She blames me for everything, for not fighting harder to keep the house, for not making more money. His voice cracked. I messed up so bad I studied him. Once this man had been the baby I cradled through pneumonia, the child who loved superhero comics, the teenager I drove to countless practices. Biological or not, I had been his mother for 3 decades, yet the memory of that dinner, the words, she's basically our maid, still seared me. I'm sorry, I said quietly, not for him, but because the whole situation was tragic. He lifted his gaze. I know I'm not in the place to ask for forgiveness, he began, but I want to try. I want to know who I am and who you are, and maybe we can find a way to be in each other's lives again. Tears welled in his eyes, genuine desperation trembling in his voice. Part of me wanted to reach out to wipe those tears away, to comfort him as I once did. Another part of me flinched, remembering the years of disrespect I perched on the arm of a chair, letting the silence stretch. Outside, a car rumbled by, headlights flashing across the faded wallpaper. Adrian sniffled, trying to hold himself together. I don't even know if you're really my mom, he said, voice trembling. I did a private DNA test, like you suggested. The results came back inconclusive, which means I might not be, I whispered. He nodded, agony etched in his expression. But you raised me, he said almost defensively. I mean, I remember you singing lullabies, making me snack plates when I got home from school, teaching me how to tie my shoes. Even if we're not blood related, that counts for something, right? A tidal wave of conflicted emotions surged through me. Yes, I'd done all those things because I'd loved him unconditionally. But had he truly loved me back? Or had he just tolerated my presence once Clarissa filled his world with glamour and social climbing illusions? He seemed to sense my hesitation. I know I messed up. I let Clarissa belittle you. I didn't defend you. I took your kindness for granted. But can't we start over somehow? Tears pooled in my eyes. Start over. I repeated, laughing bitterly. All the years lost, all the disrespect, the humiliation. He looked at me with desperation. Please, he murmured. I have nothing left but my car and a few boxes. I'm sleeping on a friend's couch. My heart wrenched. No matter how wrong he'd been, it was impossible to erase the maternal instincts that had guided me for 30 years. I'm not making any promises, I managed. You need to show me you respect me. No more requests for money, no more guilt trips. If we try to be in each other's lives, it will be on equal terms. Do you understand? He nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. Yes, I do. I swear I do. For the first time in a long while, I saw a glimpse of the sweet boy he used to be. The child who once needed me, I cautiously offered him a tissue and watched as he wept, unsure whether this was the start of healing or just another detour in our tangled story. After Adrian left, I stayed awake for hours replaying the conversation. My life had broken into two separate but overlapping arcs. The child I raised and the one who was biologically mine. One had hurt me in ways I was still learning to articulate. The other had been lost to me through no fault of his own. And in the middle stood me, Ramona Quinn, a woman who'd always worn her hair in a functional bun because nobody cared how it looked anyway. Now I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I'd taken to letting my curls out more often, embracing the silver strands that intertwined with the black. A new question haunted me. Could I possibly have meaningful relationships with both men? Carter was gentle, open-minded, and curious about who I was. Adrian was apologetic, broken, and possibly sincere in wanting to mend our bond. Part of me wondered if I had the emotional capacity to do both. I decided to focus on one day at a time. The house sale was finalized a week later. Celine confirmed it with a triumphant call the new owners would take possession in 30 days. Adrian and Clarissa would have no choice but to leave. As for the final profits, they went straight to me. No alimony, no joint claim. Legally, I was free from that property, from that stifling past, and I'd earned more than enough to start fresh. I felt a surge of gratitude and sorrow simultaneously. Gratitude for my new beginning, sorrow for the years wasted as a doormat in my own home. That same evening, Carter texted to say he'd confronted his parents again. This time they admitted to taking the settlement. They claimed they truly believed it was for the best, thinking a second switch would traumatize both families. Carter was furious, but also grateful for their honesty. I still love them, he wrote, but I can't ignore what they hid from me. He ended the message with, "We need to figure out what we want from each other. Can we meet?" My heart fluttered. I typed a simple reply. "Yes, of course. Let's meet soon." And with that, I realized the next chapter of my life was unfolding one text at a time. Carter and I met at a trendy bistro near the waterfront, a place with sweeping views of the bay and a menu specializing in organic dishes. It felt oddly upscale for both of us, but Carter said he wanted to treat me. When we settled at a corner table, he passed me a small gift bag. Inside was a book titled Lost and Found, a collection of personal essays about rediscovering family. I saw it and thought of us, he said, offering a tentative grin. I thanked him, my chest tight with emotion. Over grilled salmon and roasted vegetables, we talked about everything but the switch. He asked about my hobbies, something I couldn't recall anyone genuinely asking me before. I love painting. I confessed I haven't done it in years, though. Adrian used to say it was messy, and Clarissa complained about the smell of oils. He laughed gently. I have an art nook above the bookstore, a small loft area. I'd love for you to see it sometime. Maybe you could paint there. I blinked back unexpected tears. A place to paint offered so generously. We lingered over dessert, apple crisp with vanilla bean ice cream, and finally broached the heavier topics. Carter said he decided not to pursue legal action against Redwood Memorial. He didn't see the point. He just wanted peace. And I want to build something real with you, he added softly. Warmth flooded me. I admitted I felt the same, but told him I was also trying to navigate Adrian's reappearance in my life. Carter surprised me by saying, "If you feel you can mend things with him, I support you. I don't want you to throw away your history just because of me." That level of empathy took my breath away. How had we gone so many years without knowing each other? The conversation spilled into the night until the bistro closed and the moon glinted off the bay waters. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in decades. The gift bag and new book resting on the passenger seat like a sign of the possibilities now unfolding. I would love to know what you think so far. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. With the house now officially sold, Adrian had a week to vacate. I didn't hear from Clarissa at all, and I assumed she'd found refuge with someone else or retreated to her parents' place. Meanwhile, I felt the final cords tying me to that old life snapping one by one. The relief was immense. I closed out utility accounts, transferred final property fees, and realized I had far more money in my savings than ever before. My phone no longer buzzed with Clarissa's demands, and the silence felt luxurious. Adrian did reach out once more, though. He sent a text asking if we could meet for coffee, just to talk before I leave the house. He wrote, "My first instinct was to say no, but Carter's empathy had reminded me that shutting Adrian out entirely might not be what I truly wanted. So, I agreed, choosing a public cafe, neutral territory. He arrived looking subdued, wearing a plain jacket, his hair unstyled. I caught the faint smell of stale cigarette smoke on him, something he'd never embraced before. "You look different," I said quietly, sipping my coffee. He shrugged. "I've been stressed." "Smoking helps a little." I frowned, not approving, but I didn't lecture. I simply waited. "Clarissa's gone," he said after a moment. "She moved back with her parents in an upscale neighborhood. They want nothing to do with me. I guess I'm not as valuable now that I can't offer a fancy house." The bitterness in his tone was evident. I felt a pang of sympathy. I remembered how eager he'd been to impress Clarissa to follow her lead. He shifted in his seat. "Look, I'm sorry for everything. I know you said no more guilt trips, but I wanted you to know I appreciate everything you did. If I never said it then, well, I'm saying it now." His eyes glistened. "I have a long road ahead to rebuild my life, get a job, maybe finish my degree. But I'd like to keep in touch if that's okay." I studied his face, haunted, hopeful. Was I ready to let him back into my life in a more permanent way? That was the question swirling in my mind. In a moment of resolve, I reached out and held Adrian's hand. "I spent so many years being your caregiver, your protector," I said, voice trembling. "I need to see you stand on your own 2 feet. If we keep in touch, it has to be on equal ground." He squeezed my hand, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I understand," he whispered. We finished our coffee in reflective quiet. When we parted, he leaned in for a hug. I hesitated, then returned it. It felt unfamiliar, longer, more vulnerable than the stiff side hugs of the past. As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness for what we'd lost, tenderness for what might still be salvaged, and acceptance that some wounds take time to heal. The following week, Carter invited me to see the loft above his bookstore. It was accessed by a narrow wooden staircase at the back of the shop, leading to a cozy room with skylights that bathed the space in natural light. There was an old easel in one corner, a small table scattered with paints and brushes. Carter showed me the perfect vantage point, a window overlooking the bustling street where passers-by drifted between shops. "You can paint here anytime," he said, stepping aside so I could explore. Speechless, I ran my fingers over the easel, feeling a lump in my throat. This was the kind of gesture that said, "You matter," without requiring words. Carter then pointed to a second table against the wall. On it sat a neatly stacked pile of art canvases, some blank, some lightly gessoed. "I got them on sale," he said with a small laugh. "Figured we could fill them with whatever we want. I'm not much of an artist, but I might try my hand." I turned to him, tears brimming in my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. He shrugged, a soft smile on his lips. "We can figure this out together," he murmured, voice trembling slightly. In that moment, it felt as if the shadows of lost years began to recede, replaced by the promise of something honest and new. A bond formed not by obligation, but by choice. By the time the final boxes were cleared from my former house and the new owners moved in, I felt like an entirely different person, someone who no longer had to bend under the weight of others' expectations. The money from the sale allowed me to quietly invest in a small condominium closer to Glenwood Books. It wasn't extravagant, but it was freshly remodeled and perfect for my needs. No yard to maintain, no labyrinth of rooms to clean for ungrateful occupants. just a bright open living space where I could focus on living rather than simply surviving. When moving day arrived, Carter offered to help. He carried my modest belongings, a few suitcases of clothes, books, and art supplies up to my new condo. In the midst of our work, he paused, lifting a box labeled Ramona's Past. It contained old photo albums of Adrian's childhood. Do you want me to put this with the art supplies? Or maybe a closet? He asked carefully. I hesitated, then said, Leave it by the bookshelf. I might open it one day soon. Carter nodded, setting it down gently. Later that evening, after a takeout dinner in my mostly empty living room, Carter stayed to chat. We swapped stories of our adolescent years, his frustration at never feeling entirely in tune with his parents, my heartbreak when Adrian chose Clarissa over showing me basic decency. We laughed over silly anecdotes and commiserated over painful ones. No matter how much we might wish the hospital swap had never happened, it was undeniably the thread linking our separate lives. Eventually, Carter stood to leave, stifling a yawn. I'll stop by tomorrow, he said, stepping toward the door. Then, in a quiet voice, he added, Thank you for coming back into my life. Or, I guess, for finally coming into it for the first time. Tears prickled at my eyes. Thank you for letting me in. He gently squeezed my hand, and with that, he was gone, leaving behind an echo of warmth in the new space. I sat there gazing around my condo, my sanctuary, and felt a swell of gratitude for Aunt Vera, who kept the truth safe, for the new chance at painting, at forging real connections, for the closure I'd finally found. Life wasn't perfect, and healing wouldn't happen overnight, but I was no longer anyone's maid. I was just Ramona, a woman with her own keys, her own mortgage, and her own future shining brightly ahead. Thank you for joining us today on her Fireside Stories. Ramona's powerful journey from heartbreak and humiliation to strength and independence reminds us all that it's never too late to rewrite our own stories. I hope you felt inspired by Ramona's courage and her decision to reclaim her dignity in such a profound way. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another emotional and empowering tale. Please comment below and tell me, what would you have done if you were in Ramona's shoes? Do you think she handled Adrian's apology the right way, or would you have responded differently? I'd love to hear your perspective, and don't forget to mention where you're watching from. Until next time, keep warm by the fireside, and remember, everyone has a story worth telling.